Everything ends, eventually. Lives, stars, the universe. Time is a linear march towards oblivion. Only one beginning, only one ending. There are some things, though, that push against this fate. Things that rebel against the die cast and try to permeate through people and places and ideas, lacking a physical form, instead relying on others to pass it along. These things are stories. Whether a novel, a movie, or a game, stories live on in everyone who listens to them. Time is a cruel mistress, though, and even a story is not immune to entropy. It can change, its original plot, characters, and message being twisted over time to the point where it may indeed be a different piece entirely. It can be reduced, flattened out of its themes and ideas, used as a blunt tool for so much less than it was designed for by minds unable to grasp it. More importantly, though, it can simply be forgotten, never to be spoken of again, the closest a story can come to death. But not all stories are dead forever, and as long as there's a chance that someone, somewhere, when, will become aware of this story, they can continue the cycle of learning and passing along, with their own unique perspectives and opinions. In that way, a story can live forever.
But what does that mean for those within the story? Welcome viewers, I am Vivet Veritas, and if we're analysing the nature and construction of stories, I can't think of many better examples to examine than my ever-reliable Deltarune. I find it somewhat hard to conceptualise the level that Deltarune exists in regarding its own self-awareness and existence, but it is quite intent on saying something. It does seem to be the case that we are simply observing the world of Deltarune, with the game itself letting us into snapshots of whatever is happening. However, taking into consideration that the world of Deltarune is, in fact, its own bubble, so to speak, that we are looking into, those who experience our observation may also experience time where we are not observing them, a real Schrodinger's game situation. There is, of course, another possibility, which is that time may not pass when we are not looking at the world within Deltarune. This is the case for most pieces of media, so may not initially seem strange. But when you consider how much of an effort Deltarune has made to make sure its internal world exists separate, yet still connected in some way to the game Deltarune, survey program if you're that way inclined, of which I am, it becomes significantly more haunting. Frozen in time, in an internal stasis, waiting for somebody, anybody, to boot up the game and breathe life into this story once again. This concept is what I'm wanting to explore today. The way that Deltarune sees itself, the way it engages with basic and complex versions of concepts such as time, memory, and endings, and what that means for both the design and the thematics of the game. Deltarune is intent on talking about more than just itself. Indeed, the very nature of fiction and story is being put under the proverbial microscope. Due to this, Deltarune is a prime option to analyze the way that stories can exist regardless of who is engaging with them. And Deltarune's existence of existing outside perception means that it is very unique in the way that an ending can truly come about. The connection of all of these ideas, time, truth, and endings, is what I'm labeling the fate theory, and is what we'll be talking about now. Essentially, this theory seeks to answer a couple of questions. How does time flow in Deltarune, both the hometown and dark world parts? How are the connections between the internal and external aspects of Deltarune affected by time, regarding memory, suspension, and perception, as well as how literally stopping and starting the game can affect it? And what does this mean for the story and thematics of Deltarune, meaning how these facts relate to the narrative and thematic force of the game, and how Deltarune intends on using time and memory to comment on the nature of stories. This theory, or idea more so, is to be broken into two parts to answer all the questions with the level of detail that they deserve. In this first part, time, I want to answer the first question in its entirety. It might seem strange to only tackle one of the 3 questions, but trust me, I'll need all the space I can get. And upon seeing the script in full, I believe it's best to have this particular idea aside in its own video for reasons you'll see soon. I hope by trying to answer these questions, we will better understand the internal and external workings of Deltarune, and begin to see the bigger picture of what Deltarune can tell us about the nature of stories. Regardless of what might happen in future chapters, the answer to these questions, at the very least, should be immutable, as they comment not on plot or characters, but the very nature of Deltarune's construction. Remember folks, it's not a theory if I'm objectively right. Without further ado, let us fall into the murky darkness of time and find the mysteries that lurk within. Join me, won't you? The question of the hour is this: how does time work in Deltarune? This is a much harder question to answer than it seems, so we'll try to start in a somewhat easier place, Hometown. Within the light world, time moves linearly at the very least. They have a concept of days and weeks and a whole litany of concepts that imply a cohesive understanding of linear time similar to what we have in our world. One of the most important demonstrations of this is Azrael coming back from college at the end of the week. There does seem to be a sense of an impending event, almost as a marker for something important happening in Hometown when he arrives. Many theorists, including myself at the past, have put this at the end of Chapter 5, in time for a large reveal as a cliffhanger, though this has been undermined a little with Chapter 5 not releasing with 3 and 4. Most importantly though, we have seen the pairing of linear time within Hometown to occur side by side with narrative beats. There has been a new dark world each day, with odd things happening at night. The end of Chapter 2 does throw a bit of a wrench in this, with us presumably exploring a new world right after the cyber world, but I suppose they'd be waking up on the next day anyway. Interestingly, it seems our connection weakens somewhat at night, with Chris forcing us out of control, as if the turn of the day is a type of renewal that leaves a gap in our connection. We narratively expect the night to be calming after our big adventure, and perhaps Chris is aware of this. At its core though, people here have experienced things in the past and continue to experience things. This is pretty basic stuff, as media that experiences time linearly is a lot more common than those that don't, and saying things occur when time moves forward is not exactly rocket science. The main difference though is that these are not isolated snippets of story. Each chapter is linked together by the cycle of day and night, pushing forward, rather than unconnected episodes like something in, let's say, Super Mario Bros. Is a very basic example. This knowledge is certainly helpful, but what I've just described is the way that time works to them. The problem arises when we consider how time works between our world and Deltarune. That is, how we perceive Deltarune to be moving versus how, theoretically, the residents of Hometown perceive their own movements. This is, understandably, quite hard to visualize, considering most pieces of media do not typically require this type of scrutinization. The reason this point is important is due to the fact that the exact same thing happens within Deltarune itself, between the light and dark worlds. As I've tried to make clear in previous videos, what the dark worlds are to the lightness is the same or similar to what Deltarune is to us. This is just one more piece to the puzzle to understand how both of the worlds work, and by clarifying the operation of one, we may begin to understand the other. When we are in the light world, is time passing in the dark world? How do all 3 worlds, our real world, the light world, and the dark world, interact chronologically? Hopefully with that you can understand why it's so important to understand this specific link. Let's say I've been playing around in Hometown, after or before entering the dark world doesn't matter. I save and stop playing the game for a week. When I come back, has any time passed within the world? Well, ordinarily, no. At least it doesn't seem like any of the characters are aware of the passage of time. There are a couple of exceptions to this, but the main ones are at the end of chapters. At the end of chapter 1 we go to bed, and we can of course just stop playing here, step away and come back later. When, or if, we come back to the game, it's the morning of the next day, so clearly time did pass without us. Of course you can just keep on playing if you have chapter 2, so this falls apart a little bit. However, this brings up a larger point that's worth discussing. We are made to wait in between chapters. This makes sense from a real-world point of view. Of course, video games take time to make. Most games though just release all at once, especially narrative-based games. Toby decided that releasing Deltarune in multiple chapters, rather than all at once, was a good idea, or at least one that would work. It's likely because of the sheer size of the game and small size of the team, but I think that there's no reason that he wouldn't do something with this fact in a meta-narrative sense. In that time between chapters, what is going on in the world of the Lightners? Well, it would make sense that they aren't experiencing our time. After all, we are observing them using Deltarune as a program, so perhaps it's better to think that, okay, this is going to get a bit messy, but it's almost if it is our connection itself that has to be built between chapters. That within the universe of Deltarune, this connection has to deepen and look more and more into the world of Deltarune itself. For that reason, it would make sense that no one seems to notice potential years of time passing because, of course, it hasn't passed for them. It hasn't even passed for Chris, though I suppose that's a little hard to tell. It's only passed for us, the observers, but we are still able to choose to perceive from the time where we left off. We really have no choice. Yes, the characters do not feel our absence. Most characters, however. There is one that is acutely aware of time passing in the real world, our world, if you could even call them a character. That character is, of course, this mysterious voice at the start of the game on various social medias and perhaps many other places. This voice is almost undoubtedly Gaster, and although I'm hesitant to make any non-surefire claims in this hopefully flawlessly logical video, I may as well just say it's Gaster for ease more than anything else. Gaster is aware of time passing, which can be seen not only through dialogue within chapters themselves, but also outside of it. He explicitly mentions a long time passing, which means that on some level, there is a time difference between our world and Deltarune. Whatever Gaster is, I suppose that being behind the controls of the observational system that is survey program, he can clearly feel time pass. When we look at Deltarune, we see time passing, but also not. It is technically linear, only due to our personal linear perception of time, but theoretically we could stay in the school for a near infinite amount of time. Compared to another game, let's say Breath of the Wild, which has dynamic time, your actions don't necessarily move time forward, it just moves. In Deltarune though, there is no actual mechanical time limit or progression, aside from the one signposted by our actions. There is no incremental second-to-second progression of time. The time of day simply changes when it is required to, and through our actions. It is afternoon when we leave the first Dark World. It is night when Chris creates a Dark Fountain. We see time at an entirely different scale, though it does, of course, move forward. Until it doesn't. There aren't many indications that Deltarune's save and loading are diegetic, that being that the characters within Deltarune are aware of it. The characters do not remember previous saves, nor do they feel the impact of rewinding time. However, that does not mean that the saving and loading of Deltarune is not important, especially when considering the strange time connections. By saving and then resetting, we are able to undo time and turn back the clock within Deltarune itself. This is, of course, not how time generally works. We have both the past and future of Deltarune laid out before us, and we can, to a degree, pick and choose from when we observe it. This ties into the idea of Deltarune, or survey program, as a tool of observation. Perhaps the story of Deltarune has already all happened and we are simply observing points on it. with nothing we actually do mattering. Considering that, it's kind of interesting that we are made to wait for each installment. Clearly, our world and the light world operate on different timescales, and from what we've discussed here, it does not seem that they are inherently connected. We can only walk through what the game has laid out for us and wait for things to happen by triggering certain key events, or we can pick specific times through saving and loading to observe. You might realize that this is true of a lot of video games, which is a good sign. It means I, and / or Toby, haven't gone completely off the deep end. Unfortunately, we're about to. Save and loading in Undertale was a way to show within the game itself the effect that the player can have on a universe that exists as a game, that someone with the determination to do what is desired is capable of. In fact, them being diegetic exists in part to make these game concepts make sense within the world so it can be commented on. Saving and loading are diegetic because they best show the way that you can change people's lives, making or tearing away their happy endings. This is related to the key thesis of Undertale, the idea of worth and kindness, something that I talked about at length all the way back in my first video. Of course, there is no guarantee that whatever Toby is making diegetic to Deltarune will do a similar thing. However, it's the nature of these ideas that is important here. Deltarune simply doesn't operate by the same rules that Undertale does, and uses its tools differently. Deltarune as a program is diegetic at the very least, due to the appearance of the odd menus, unused code, and player name knowledge, compared to Undertale, which is aware of the player, yes, but not of itself as a game. The point, though, of Deltarune as a program does have relevance to the point at hand. Although, as I mentioned, there aren't massive signs that saves and loads are diegetic like in Undertale, that doesn't mean they're not important. Someone here in Deltarune, whoever has connected us to it, it's Gus, just give me this one, knows about Deltarune as a game. Because of this, it lets them, and by process us, manipulate the timeline completely. This goes outside of saving, then taking 4 years and coming back to the exact same time in Deltarune. No, there is a bigger picture than that. When manipulating these save files with the ominous green tint and our guide through it, we get some very, very interesting messages. What interesting behavior indeed. The messages that we see here all revolve around treating these save files that we have as mere constructs, barely mattering. Now, I'll leave most of the metaphysical explanations for people who know a lot more than I do about this kind of thing, but what's important to recognize is that these are defined, or at the very least suggested, by the game itself to be different timelines. For whatever reasons, there is a very small difference between the 3 slots. It seems that the timeline itself is almost irrelevant and simply molds to whatever slot you choose to play the game in. The first slot will always have the cross-country shirt in the drawer regardless of whatever actions you take. Really, though, this is just to ensure that we, as the audience, understand what these save files technically are. Are they important? Well, the save files we have are simply a way for us to look at Deltarune through Chris, and although we can manipulate them to some degree, they hold no salvation of breaking outside of the path we've been tasked with. If we wish to finish the game, there are some actions we simply have to take. We can easily destroy a timeline and do the exact same thing again, or pick up where we left off, or copy entire saves. Whatever it might be, from our perspective using this system, time is completely malleable. However, when we are in the system, that is controlling Chris, we are at the whims of the game itself, where time is only pushed forward through us going along with what it desires. Technically through our actions, but are they ours if we don't have a choice? In both cases, time is not moving as it normally would. Again, somewhat normal in a standard video game, but much less normal in one where so much attention has been brought to the concept of time and how it works. With all that, this is all the evidence I need to conclude that our world and hometown, or all of the game really, are chronologically desynced. time in Deltarune does not move forward as ours does, like a standard video game, but it's more complex than that. We, through Gaster, have complete control over our observation of, but not interaction with, Deltarune from a chronological perspective. Think of it as there being two barriers. Survey Program kind of exists in a space between us and Deltarune, and we can manipulate that freely, like a game. However, by participating in the game, we are at the whims of its time. There's inherently no way that these two can be chronologically congruent, otherwise the entire facade of the observation inherent to Survey Program and Deltarune as a whole falls away. Because of this, it means that what we perceive, what we see, isn't reliant on the time within Deltarune itself. Given this fact, it's important to consider a relevant sticking point within community discussion. What was happening within Deltarune before we began perceiving it? There is a belief that the light world as we know it only came into existence once we booted up the game for the first time. Mechanically, this is true in a way. I suppose our copy of the game is made up of a program that is a set of abstract ones and zeros that, when run, creates Deltarune as a personal experience. However, we are not talking about when we perceive Deltarune to start. Instead, we have to think within the light world itself, like we did before. This does require a bit of literal thinking regarding the universe that Hometown exists in. Belaboring the point of Deltarune the program and Deltarune the world has always existed within the world itself, if that makes sense. Hometown has a long history, though what's important is that it has one at all. To those within Hometown, their world has always existed. Well, as far back as anything can exist, really. I'll look forward to a cosmological history of its universe in Chapter 6. The characters are simply going about their lives within their world's bubble, and we are choosing to perceive this moment. This means, essentially, that the world of Deltarune existed to the residents of Hometown long before the start of the game itself, but did not exist to us, the players. This, naturally, leads us to a much pondered question, and one I have tried to avoid for some time now. If this is how it works for the light world, then how does Dark World's time work? As in, when does a Dark World's history begin, and when does it end? The sheer amount of evidence to trawl through is quite substantial, so we should probably start at the basics. The initial impression that the game gives, perhaps intentionally, is that a dark world is created by whoever opens the fountain. In the first two cases, this is the knight, and the third if Chris is the knight. However, anyone with sufficient determination can create a dark fountain, and it seems possible to be able to do it within another dark world itself. The act of creating said dark fountain is apparently rather simple. You just need to focus your determination into a sharp object and plunge it into the earth. I'm almost completely sure that it's a lot more complex than that, but for the sake of understanding how they work, we'll take this at face value for now. This creates an entry point into a dark world, seemingly constricted to the room where it was created, though I believe next chapters will shine a bit of light on that, and anyone who enters can travel there, willingly or not. The only way to close the Dark World is at the Dark Fountain as well, and so far Chris is the only one capable of doing that. There's this idea that the will of the creator flows into the Dark Fountain, and is imbued with the powers, beliefs, and thoughts of whoever opened it. This puts the knight as not only a creator, but also an inspirer. It implies that all of these characters we see, King, Queen, Spampton, Rules, Shawm, Jevil, etc., are manifestations of the identity of the knight, and the world and its form is taken from the heart and mind of them too. However, is that really true? Many Darkners talk of characters, places, and events existing and happening long before their creation. Shawm, Sweetcap and Cakes, and the Addisons are just a few examples of Darkness having prior history in these worlds. very much not possible if they truly were created in one day, unless that too was the will of the creator, which doesn't really make sense due to their noted existences sans night. The phrase doesn't even appear anywhere in the game, trust me, I checked. So what is it that the creator is actually imbuing into the dark world they open? This is a bit of a tangent, but I believe that they're actually imbuing their own determination into a given world. As mentioned earlier, a significant amount of determination is required to create one, and by infusing their determination into the dark world, it would enable said world to subsist outside the creator, existing independently and without need for upkeep. It's, in a weird way, kind of similar to the determination experiments in Undertale. By infusing a monster, flower, whatever with determination, they are able to persist continuously, though I think this is mostly a coincidence. Determination, in a way, is the key that unlocks the Dark Fountain, allowing us access to the Dark World. From what was mentioned in Ralsei's Roaring monologue and other places, it's likely that keeping this door unlocked for too long, or too many doors unlocked, would cause problems for both worlds, especially the Light World. Almost like it takes responsibility to open these worlds, though I'm getting sidetracked. Essentially, the creator lets the door open, and likely has some kind of power to shape the Dark World itself due to their malleable nature, possibly the minds of characters like King and Queen, for example. But the fact that we hear multiple characters talking about the past, and seemingly have remained consistent, means that it fundamentally couldn't have just popped into existence with all of this pre-made history. The point of that pre-made history is, of course, the other main explanation, that being that the Dark Worlds were just created by the Knight, or whoever, and they kind of came with this history. I feel like I should acknowledge it for a bit and talk about it, but debunking it is as simple as looking at the thematics of the story itself and what it means to create, experience, and access. At the core of all this, we have to consider the relationships at play here. As previously mentioned, by running Deltarune the program, we are able to observe Deltarune the world. The world has always existed internally, but the program has not, and gives the illusion to us, the player, of creation. The answer, therefore, is really quite simple. The Dark Worlds, to the residents of the Dark Worlds, have always been existing, or at least for as long as anything can. And when a Dark World is made, it is simply observing the Dark World in that moment. Although it is stated that the Dark Worlds are born from their individual Dark Fountains, I think that's more a metaphorical explanation. Instead, I think it's much easier to consider this. The Dark Fountains give form to the Dark Worlds. Essentially, the Dark Fountains are not what create the Dark Worlds, at least not within the world of Deltarune. This is why Dark Worlds can be aware of each other before any of them are actually opened by a Lightner. They have their own history and connection, regardless of whether a fountain itself has been opened. Of course, this raises the question of what would happen if a Dark World was opened in an already existing Dark World. I'm not sure what would happen from a metatextual point of view if you are creating fiction within fiction, but I believe with the mechanics presented, it would either 1. Do nothing, 2. Cause the roaring, or 3. Let us say hello to Gaster by creating something darker than dark. It is likely that the source of all of this darkness is the Grand Fountain, which is no doubt created by someone or something, but that's pretty much the same as saying, well, the Light World was created by, I don't know, the Angel. Essentially, the opener of the fountain does not create the Dark World, much like us opening Deltarune does not create the Light World. We simply imbue it with our own experiences, our feelings, and our perspectives. Picture it like this. This is the Light World, hometown, whatever you want to call it. And this is the Dark World, a layer of darkness beneath the Light World. The Dark World reflects the Light World, two halves in balance, and by piercing the veil between the two with a sharp object, such as a knife, you can cause a rupture between them, causing the Dark World to flood into the light. This action of the dark bleeding into the light explains a very important aspect of Deltarune, the roaring. The roaring makes a lot more sense when thought of like this. The Dark World's not being created, but rather let loose into the Light World would of course have the effect described by Ralsei. The barriers between different Dark Worlds would bleed together, causing the darkness to be turned to stone, and the lightness would have no more light as the veil tears and there is no longer any reality. Where the Titans come in, I'm not sure, but that remains to be seen. With the barrier between light and dark absolutely annihilated, no time can pass. The sun never rises. It is just completely frozen. In a way, I suppose, the story ends, since it cannot continue. We kind of see this when we give up, with the world being swallowed in darkness. Without us to act as a balancing force, it seems that the roaring is inevitable. This is precisely why the times work the way they do. If there is a failure point and it causes this great calamity of paralysis, there would be no way to undo it. Or maybe it's the only way it can end. This is a type of ending, an ending of darkness and paralysis. Not only do we see the existence of history within the Dark World, we also see those within the Dark Worlds experience a sense of time passing that is directionally consistent with the passage of time within the Light World, though, as mentioned, not necessarily with our world. Ralsei is aware that time has passed since we last saw him. It's not like they're all in some kind of stasis. And although it's unclear whether or not he actually experienced a day like we did, he definitely experienced something. However, the biggest piece of evidence for this fact is that time passes in the Light World while we're in the Dark World, though it is a little hard to tell how 1-to-1 the ratio is. Dark Worlds exist as long as the Light World exists, and exists in tandem with them. Their respective histories, to a degree, travel parallel to each other. I believe the evidence to suggest the contrary is either a red herring or simple writing inconsistencies against what seems to be not only literally, but also thematically true. All signs point towards the synchronicity of the light and dark worlds, though how particularly aware the dark worlds are of their own existence is a different question. I think it's entirely possible that the way that the Dark Worlds exist without the determination or focus from the Dark Fountain is just quite different to how we generally understand and perceive that. And although they clearly show examples of time passing, it might not be in the same way that we see them when we travel to the Dark Worlds. I don't think that matters too much though, at least for the sake of understanding the time dynamics of the various worlds and how they interact. We've solved a mystery here. That's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Understanding Deltarune's time dynamics is important for what we're talking about next. But we're not done. There is something I feel I should mention, if for no other reason other than to assuage my own conscience. In this video and on my channel in general, I've talked ad nauseum, say it with me folks, about how the connection between us and the light world is the same as the connection between the light and dark worlds. However, with what I'm asserting here, that the light and dark worlds occur at the same time alongside each other, I'm creating a key point of difference as to the nature of these connections, the exact opposite as to what I've been arguing for a while now. Unfortunately, I can't say too much else aside from just trust me. This is going to be important, but talking about it to any further extent now wouldn't make much sense. I'll say this. The most important fact is that the light and dark worlds are congruent, and for the game to work, the dark worlds and our world cannot be. Therefore, our world and the light world also can't be congruent. It's annoying and kind of vague, so really all you need to know is that this apparent discrepancy between the operation of these two connections we've been discussing is not only necessary, but also intentional and crucial. And that's about it. And that's where we're going to end it for now. I was unsure whether or not to finish part 1 here, but I think solving Dark World history is enough for one day, or video. Having this just here is kind of, in its own way, its own topic, so I don't want to overcomplicate it with anything even more problematic, though I'm sure that my incredibly intelligent viewers are having no trouble at all understanding. Thank you all for watching as always. This is definitely something very different to what I'm used to doing, and I'm hoping that there'll be a good amount of interest in my completely inane ramblings, and hopefully chapters 3 and 4 won't absolutely throw me for a loop and I'll have to rewrite everything that I've already got. I'll do my best. Please join me next time for a deep dive into what all of this actually means. Now that we know how time works in Deltarune, we can understand why all of this is important, what it means for Deltarune's construction, and what it could tell us about the future of Deltarune. Thank you as always to my patient and wonderful patrons, Michael Bates, Meggie, Zalgo, Tybee Fitzhugh, Visible, Carla D, and Nigel Robinson for your continued support. Until next time, I've been Vivat Veritas, and I'll see you again soon.